The Hafele-Keating Experiment. In October 1971, physicists Joseph Hafele and Richard Keating performed an experiment that proved time can move at different speeds, and under certain conditions, backwards relative to a reference point. They placed 4 cesium-beam atomic clocks on commercial airline flights circling the globe eastward and westward, then compared them to reference clocks that stayed on the ground at the United States Naval Observatory. Einstein's theory of relativity predicted that clocks moving at high speeds and at different gravitational potentials would tick at different rates. But the Hafele-Keating experiment produced results that seemed impossible when you really think about them. Some of the clocks had aged less than expected, while others had aged more. Time had moved at different speeds for identical clocks, based purely on their motion and position. The eastward flying clocks lost 59 nanoseconds compared to the ground-based reference clocks. They had experienced less time passing, they had traveled into the future relative to the ground. But the westward flying clocks gained 273 nanoseconds. They had experienced more time passing, they had effectively traveled backwards in time relative to the ground. Think about what this means. 3 synchronized atomic clocks, devices accurate to billionths of a second, started at the same moment showing identical times. After the flights, they showed different times. The clocks disagreed about how much time had passed. One clock said 59 nanoseconds, less time had elapsed. Another said 273 nanoseconds more had elapsed. They couldn't all be right, yet they were all measuring time correctly according to their own reference frames. This wasn't theoretical physics or mathematical abstraction. These were physical atomic clocks, the most accurate timekeeping devices humans had created, showing different elapsed times after experiencing different conditions. The clocks measured time moving backwards relative to each other. For the westward clocks, time had literally run faster, aging them more than the ground clocks. They had experienced more of time's passage while the ground clocks experienced less. The predictions matched Einstein's equations with remarkable precision. The calculated time dilation from special relativity, motion-based, and general relativity, gravity-based, combined to predict exactly the nanosecond differences that the clocks measured. Theory predicted 40 nanoseconds gained for westward flights due to slower effective speed relative to Earth's rotation, plus 275 nanoseconds gained due to weaker gravity at altitude, minus 96 nanoseconds lost due to time dilation from the plane's velocity. The net prediction was 219 nanoseconds gained, with an error margin of 23 nanoseconds. The measured result was 273 nanoseconds, well within the predicted range. The experiment has been repeated with increasingly precise clocks and confirmed every time. In 2010, physicists at the National Institute of Standards and Technology used optical lattice clocks, accurate to 1 second in 3.7 billion years, and detected time dilation effects over elevation differences of just 33 centimeters. They placed one clock on a laboratory table and another clock on a shelf 1 foot higher. The higher clock ticked measurably faster due to the infinitesimal decrease in gravitational field strength. Time moves measurably differently for your head versus your feet because your head experiences slightly weaker gravity. GPS satellites must account for relativistic time dilation, or they'd provide inaccurate positions. The satellites orbit at altitudes where Earth's gravity is weaker and where their orbital velocity creates time dilation effects. Without corrections for both general and special relativity, GPS clocks would drift by 38 microseconds per day, enough to cause positioning errors accumulating to 10 kilometers per day. Every time you use GPS navigation, you're depending on technology that compensates for time moving at different rates. Your phone knows that time passes differently for satellites than for you. Time doesn't move uniformly. It's not a universal constant ticking forward at the same rate everywhere. It speeds up in weaker gravity. It slows down at higher velocities. It moves backwards relative to different reference frames. We've measured it with atomic precision. We've proven it mathematically. We've built global infrastructure that depends on these effects being real. Time is flexible, and under the right conditions, it demonstrably reverses. Presentiment Experiments. Starting in the 1990s, psychologist Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences conducted experiments showing that the human body responds to stimuli before those stimuli occur. The experiments measured physiological reactions, skin conductance, heart rate, blood flow, and pupil dilation, while subjects viewed random images on computer screens. Some images were emotionally neutral, landscapes, household objects. Others were violent or sexually explicit, autopsy photos, erotic images, scenes of violence. The protocol was rigorous. Subjects sat in front of a computer screen while sensors monitored their physiology continuously. The computer randomly selected images from a database and displayed them for several seconds, then showed a blank screen before the next random selection. The random selection happened after the physiological measurement period. There was no way for subjects to know what image was coming. The results were impossible according to conventional causality. Subjects' bodies reacted to disturbing images before the computer selected and displayed those images. Heart rate changed, skin conductance increased, blood flow patterns shifted, pupils dilated, all before the random number generator chose which image to show, and seconds before the image appeared on screen. The effect size was small, typically 2 to 5 seconds of anticipatory response before the stimulus, but the statistical significance was enormous across thousands of trials. The body was responding to future events that hadn't occurred yet and couldn't be predicted because they depended on truly random selection. Information was traveling backwards in time, from the future stimulus to the present physiological state. Radin's experiments were published in peer-reviewed journals, including Frontiers in Psychology and the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The research has been replicated by independent laboratories in multiple countries. A 2012 meta-analysis by Mossbridge, Tresoldi, and Utz examined 26 studies from different laboratories involving over 1,000 participants and found consistent presentiment effects, with combined odds against chance exceeding 10 billion to 1. The protocol eliminates normal explanations. The images are selected randomly by computer using quantum random number generators after the physiological measurement period. There's no way for subjects to predict which type of image will appear through pattern detection. The selection is genuinely random. No subliminal cues exist. No sensory information leaks. Yet the body responds approximately 2 to 5 seconds before the stimulus, with response patterns matching the stimulus type. In one particularly compelling variation, subjects were shown images while lying in a functional magnetic resonance imaging (fMRI) machine, scanning their brain activity in real time. The brain showed activation patterns in the amygdala and visual cortex consistent with emotional response before emotional images appeared, but not before neutral images. The brain was distinguishing between future image types before those images existed in the experimental timeline. Different brain regions lit up depending on whether the future image would be violent, erotic, or neutral before the image was selected. Think about the implications. If your body responds to stimuli before they occur, then the future is constantly reaching backwards to influence your present physiological state. Every emotionally significant event you'll experience might be casting shadows backwards in time, creating subtle anticipatory responses in your nervous system seconds before the event occurs. Your heart rate increases before you see something disturbing. Your skin conductance changes before you encounter something arousing. Your pupils dilate before you witness something shocking. The mechanism is completely unknown. How does information travel backwards from future stimulus to present response? Proposed explanations include quantum effects in neural microtubules, retrocausal influence from future brain states, properties of consciousness existing outside normal spacetime, or unknown physics of time itself. We don't know how it works. We only know it happens measurably and repeatedly in laboratories across the world. The Global Consciousness Project. In 1998, Princeton University's Peer Laboratory began the Global Consciousness Project, a network of hardware random number generators, RNGs, distributed across the world in over 70 locations, continuously generating random sequences and sending data to a central server in Princeton. The purpose was to test whether global consciousness responds to major events, and whether that response appears before the events occur. Random number generators based on quantum processes or electronic noise should produce purely random output. equal probability of generating ones and zeros with no patterns or deviations. Across the global network of dozens of RNGs, the combined output should show perfect randomness over time. Any sustained deviation from randomness suggests something is influencing supposedly random quantum processes generating the numbers. On September 11, 2001, something extraordinary happened. The global RNG network showed massive deviation from expected randomness beginning approximately 4 out of 5 hours before American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time. The deviation started around 4:00 a.m. and intensified as the morning progressed, reaching peak deviation during and immediately after the attacks. The statistical analysis showed odds against this deviation occurring by chance were over 1 million to 1. The network of random number generators scattered across continents had somehow become synchronized, producing correlated non-random output before the attacks began. It was as if the RNGs were responding to a future event, with the response beginning hours before the event occurred in normal time. The deviation continued during the attacks and gradually returned to normal randomness over the following day. But the pre-event deviation is what matters for temporal reversal. The RNG network responded to September 11th before it happened. Something about the future event reached backwards in time and influenced quantum random processes hours before the attacks began. The future was affecting the past. This wasn't the only case. The network showed similar pre-event deviations before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Deviation began 4 hours before the earthquake. The death of Princess Diana in 1997. Deviation began approximately 2 hours before the crash. The funeral of Pope John Paul II in 2005, and other globally significant events. The effect appears most strongly when events produce widespread emotional response, affecting millions of people simultaneously. The project has recorded data continuously since 1998, analyzing over 500 global events. Statistical analysis shows that significant deviations from expected randomness cluster around major world events, and crucially, often begin before those events occur in the normal timeline. The pattern is clear, repeatable, and statistically robust. Random quantum processes respond to major events before those events happen. One interpretation proposed by project director Roger Nelson is that human consciousness, when focused collectively on significant events, creates retrocausal effects that influence quantum processes backwards through time. The future event, once it occurs and affects millions of minds simultaneously, reaches backwards and creates detectable changes in supposedly random quantum systems. Global consciousness responds to the future, and that response propagates backwards to affect the present. Critics argue the statistical methods are flawed, that the definition of major events is too flexible, allowing cherry-picking, or that random data always contains apparent patterns if you look hard enough. But the project's entire dataset is publicly available online. The analysis methodology is transparent and documented, and multiple independent statisticians have examined the data and confirmed the patterns exist, with significance far beyond chance probability. Several skeptical researchers have attempted to debunk the findings by running their own analysis on the raw data. Most concluded that while they disagreed with some interpretations, the statistical deviations are real and difficult to explain through chance alone. The random number generators genuinely deviate from randomness in correlation with major global events, and these deviations frequently begin before the events occur. If the Global Consciousness Project results are genuine, and the accumulating evidence over 25+ years suggests they are, then the future influences the past continuously. Major events that will affect human consciousness create ripples backwards through time, detectable as deviations from quantum randomness, hours before the events occur in normal space-time. Time's arrow is permeable to quantum information, flowing backwards from future to past. Out-of-place artifacts. In June 1844, Sir David Brewster, a respected Scottish scientist and inventor, reported finding an iron nail embedded in a block of Devonian sandstone from the Kingoody quarry in Scotland. The sandstone was dated to approximately 400 million years old, based on geological strata and fossil content. Metal nails as manufactured objects weren't invented until thousands of years ago. The nail shouldn't exist in rock that formed before multicellular life colonized land. Brewster presented the artifact to the British Association for the Advancement of Science. The nail was genuine iron, showed oxidation patterns, and was completely enclosed within the sandstone block, with no evidence of the stone being opened and resealed. The geological layers containing the block were undisturbed. Either the nail was 400 million years old, or it had somehow been inserted into stone that formed 400 million years ago. This wasn't an isolated case. In 1885, workers at a foundry in Vaclabrück, Austria, broke open a block of coal and found a small metallic cube inside. The cube measured approximately 2.5 inches on each side, had precise right angles, weighed 785 grams, and appeared to be manufactured from steel and nickel alloy. The coal was from a mine dated to the Tertiary period, approximately 60 million years ago. The cube was examined by the Salzburg Museum, where it was photographed and documented. The museum labeled it as enigmatic and couldn't explain its presence in coal millions of years old. In 1912, employees at Thomas Municipal Electric Plant in Oklahoma were breaking up coal for the furnaces when they discovered an iron pot embedded in a large chunk of coal. The pot was cast iron, showed manufacturing marks, and was completely enclosed within the coal with no cracks or openings in the surrounding material. The coal was from the Wilburton mine, deposited during the Carboniferous period approximately 312 million years ago. Several workers witnessed the discovery and signed affidavits attesting to finding the pot inside unbroken coal. In 1961, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell, rock hunters and mineral shop owners near Olancha, California, found a stone containing what appeared to be a spark plug. They were collecting geodes for their shop. When they cut open one geode for display, they found a ceramic core surrounded by metal components with hexagonal shape identical to 1920s Champion spark plugs. The surrounding stone was a geode that geological assessment dated to approximately 500,000 years old. X-rays of the artifact showed metal components, a ceramic insulator, and structure matching early 20th century spark plugs. The artifact became known as the Kozo artifact and has been studied by multiple researchers, though the original has since been lost. The most thoroughly documented case is the London Hammer. In 1936, Max and Emma Hahn and their son were walking along Red Creek near London, Texas, when they noticed a piece of wood protruding from a rock formation. They took the rock home. Years later, their son broke open the rock and found an iron hammer with wooden handle inside. The stone was identified as Cretaceous limestone, approximately 140 million years old, based on geological assessment of the formation. The hammer was clearly of modern manufacture, metal head with remains of wooden handle, construction consistent with 19th century American tool making. The hammer has been studied extensively. Metallurgical analysis showed the head is 96.6% iron with unusually high purity and no sulfur content. Manufacturing characteristics inconsistent with natural meteoric iron, but matching techniques for refined iron. The wooden handle has partially petrified, transformed into coal, a process typically requiring millions of years. Researchers at the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas, where the hammer is now displayed, have conducted multiple tests confirming the stone is genuine Cretaceous limestone and the hammer is enclosed within it with no evidence of insertion into pre-existing cracks. Skeptics argue these artifacts are hoaxes, misidentifications, or result from rapid mineral formation around modern objects through processes like calcification or concretion formation that can happen quickly under the right chemical conditions. They suggest the objects fell into mud or mineral-rich water that rapidly hardened around them, creating the appearance of great age. But this explanation fails to account for several factors. Artifacts found deep in coal mines at depths where the seams are undisturbed and definitely ancient. Objects completely enclosed in stone with no cracks, intrusions, or evidence of recent mineral deposition. Multiple independent discoveries by credible witnesses, including scientists, miners, and foundry workers who had no motive to fabricate, and the specific geological context matching ancient strata rather than recent formations. Another explanation. one that challenges everything we understand about causality. These objects somehow traveled backwards in time and became embedded in stone that was forming millions of years ago. The nail, the cube, the pot, the spark plug, the hammer, all were manufactured in the historical period, then somehow displaced temporally into the distant past, where they became fossilized or encased in forming stone layers. This seems impossible. Objects can't travel backwards through millions of years. But the alternative, that advanced manufactured objects existed hundreds of millions of years ago, or that unknown civilizations with metallurgy existed in deep prehistory, is equally impossible. Either time travel occurred, allowing modern objects to exist in the ancient past, or our entire chronology of geological and human history is fundamentally wrong. If objects can travel backwards in time and become embedded in ancient stone, then time's arrow is permeable in both directions. Objects from the future, our recent past, can physically manifest in the past, geological deep time, and persist there, incorporated into forming stone. The presence of a 19th century hammer in 100-million-year-old limestone is time moving backwards. The object exists before it was created, present in an era that preceded its manufacture by geological epochs. The delayed choice quantum eraser. In 2000, physicists at the University of Maryland performed what many consider the most disturbing experiment ever conducted: the delayed choice quantum eraser. The experiment proved mathematically that measurements made in the future can change events that already occurred in the past. The setup involves sending photons through a double-slit apparatus, a classic quantum mechanics experiment. Normally, if you don't measure which slit a photon passes through, it creates an interference pattern on the detector, acting like a wave that goes through both slits simultaneously. If you do measure which slit it passes through, the interference pattern disappears and the photon acts like a particle going through one specific slit. But the delayed choice version adds a twist that breaks causality. The experimenters used entangled photon pairs. One photon, the signal photon, goes to a detector immediately. The other photon, the idler photon, takes a much longer path and arrives later. By measuring the idler photon, they can determine which slit the signal photon went through. But this determination happens after the signal photon has already hit the detector and been recorded. Here's the impossible part. The experimenters can choose whether to measure the idler photon in a way that reveals which slit information or in a way that erases that information. And they make this choice after the signal photon has already been detected. When they choose to erase the which slit information, the already detected signal photon retroactively shows an interference pattern, meaning it went through both slits like a wave. When they choose to keep the which slit information, the already detected photon shows no interference, meaning it went through one slit like a particle. The measurement choice made in the future determines the photon's behavior in the past. This isn't interpretation or philosophy. It's mathematical certainty. The photon's state when it hit the detector depended on a measurement that hadn't been made yet. The future changed the past. The experiment has been replicated numerous times with increasingly sophisticated variations. In 2007, French physicists demonstrated the effect with longer time delays. In 2015, Australian researchers showed it works with atoms, not just photons. Every replication confirms the same impossible result. Future measurements affect past events. Physicists argue endlessly about what this means. Some say the photon exists in superposition of all possible pasts until the future measurement collapses it. Others claim it proves the future literally reaches backwards and alters history. Still others argue it demonstrates time doesn't exist as we think. Past and future are equally real and influencing each other. But no physicist disputes that it happens. The mathematics is certain. The experiments are repeatable. The statistical significance is overwhelming. Measurements in the future change what already happened in the past. Time moves backwards in quantum systems. Kozyrev's time. Experiments. Russian astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev spent decades from the 1950s through the 1970s conducting experiments suggesting time has physical properties that can be measured, concentrated, and manipulated. Working at the Pulkovo Observatory, Kozyrev performed thousands of experiments on what he called the physical properties of time. Kozyrev built specialized mirrors from highly polished aluminum, curved into specific geometries that he claimed could reflect and concentrate time, flow the way optical mirrors concentrate light. He positioned these time mirrors around experimental subjects and measured extraordinary effects. Subjects inside Kozyrev mirrors reported perceiving distant events in real time, events occurring thousands of miles away at the exact moment they happened. More disturbing, some subjects reported perceiving events before they occurred, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours into the future. In one documented 1977 experiment in Novosibirsk, a subject inside Kozyrev mirrors reported a vivid impression of a ship sinking in the Pacific. The impression came suddenly with strong emotional content. The subject described the ship, the location, the circumstances. 6 hours later, news reached the facility that a ship had indeed sunk in the Pacific, matching the description. But the ship had sunk 8 hours before the subject's vision. The subject perceived the event after it occurred physically, but before news could arrive. More remarkably, the physiological measurements showed the subject's stress response began approximately 10 hours before the vision, meaning the body was responding before the ship sank, before the event occurred at all. Kozyrev also conducted astronomical experiments suggesting he could detect stellar events before Earth received light from those events. He built specialized telescopes with detectors that responded to what he called time radiation from stars. The detectors showed responses corresponding to stars' current positions, rather than their apparent positions based on light travel time. His work was classified by the Soviet government and remained mostly unknown in the West until the 1990s. Critics argue his experiments were poorly controlled and his theoretical framework was pseudoscience. But researchers who examined his notebooks found meticulous experimental records. Recent Russian and Ukrainian researchers have built modern Kozyrev mirrors and reported similar effects. Subjects in updated mirrors report perceiving distant events and accessing information from apparently future time coordinates. Brain scans show unusual activity patterns in temporal processing regions. If Kozyrev's results have any validity, they suggest time has physical structure that can be concentrated geometrically, allowing consciousness to navigate time in multiple directions. Remote viewing future events. Between 1972 and 1995, the U.S. government ran classified programs investigating psychic phenomena for intelligence purposes. Declassified in 1995, these programs included extensive documentation of remote viewing, perceiving distant locations without being physically present. Most disturbing for conventional physics, remote viewers successfully described future events. They provided accurate information about situations before those situations existed. In one 1976 case, remote viewer Pat Price was given only geographic coordinates and a future date 2 weeks ahead. He described a military facility in detail: buildings, antenna arrays, equipment, operational activities. When personnel visited the coordinates on the specified date, they found exactly what Price described. But the facility didn't exist when Price remote viewed it. Construction was ongoing. The configuration Price described was only achieved on the target date. He had seen the future. In another case, Joseph McMoneagle described a Soviet industrial facility interior in 1979. Years later, satellite imagery confirmed his description, but showed the facility as it existed in the mid-1980s, not 1979. The facility was under construction when he viewed it. He perceived a future state years ahead. Declassified CIA documents include hundreds of remote viewing sessions targeting future events. Statistical analysis shows hit rates significantly above chance, particularly for near-future targets. Success rates decline for distant futures, but remain above random even for events a year ahead. The program was terminated not because it didn't work, documents acknowledge it did, but because results were too inconsistent for operational intelligence use. Remote viewers could describe futures with remarkable accuracy sometimes, but not reliably enough. If trained individuals can perceive future events with statistically significant accuracy, then information flows backwards from future to present. The future exists in some form, accessible to consciousness. Time becomes navigable in both directions. Animal earthquake prediction. Before the 2009 L'Aquila earthquake in Italy, researchers studying toads documented that 96% of the male toad population abandoned their breeding site 5 days before any seismic activity. The toads left 3 days before measurable seismic signals and didn't return until aftershocks subsided. This was highly unusual behavior during peak breeding season. Before the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan, deep-sea fish that normally live below 1,000 meters washed ashore days before the quake. Birds abandoned nesting areas. Elephants at Tokyo Zoo became agitated 3 days before. No seismic signals existed yet to detect. Before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, elephants in Sri Lanka moved inland hours before the wave hit. Flamingos flew to higher ground. Dogs refused to approach beaches. After the tsunami, almost no animal corpses were found. They had evacuated before the disaster. The standard explanation is that animals detect P waves that travel faster than destructive S waves. But P waves only exist during earthquakes, not days before. When toads evacuate 5 days early, no seismic waves exist to detect. Another explanation suggests animals sense electromagnetic changes as rock stress builds. But this doesn't explain days-early evacuations when stress levels aren't measurably unusual. A more radical explanation. Animals perceive future earthquakes. They receive information about coming disasters through unknown mechanisms, perhaps quantum effects in nervous systems, perhaps consciousness accessing future timeline coordinates. If animals perceive earthquakes days before they occur, when no physical precursors exist, then information travels backwards from the future disaster to present animal consciousness. Animals experience the future and respond in the present. The Philadelphia Experiment. In October 1943, according to multiple witnesses, the U.S. Navy conducted an experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard involving the destroyer escort USS Eldridge. The experiment allegedly attempted to make the ship invisible to radar using powerful electromagnetic fields. According to accounts that emerged in the 1950s, the experiment succeeded beyond expectations. The ship became invisible, dematerialized from Philadelphia, appeared briefly in Norfolk, Virginia, then rematerialized in Philadelphia. Some crew members were allegedly fused into the ship's structure. Others experienced severe physiological effects. Most relevant to temporal reversal, several crew members reportedly experienced the time displacement. They described experiencing hours or days passing, while only minutes elapsed externally. Some claimed to have experienced events before the causes of those events occurred. One alleged crew member, Alfred Bialek, claimed publicly that he jumped from 1943 to 1983 and back, retaining memories from both timelines. Another witness, Carl Allen, sent letters in the 1950s to astrophysicist Morris Jessup, describing crew members frozen in time, existing in suspended states where time stopped for them while continuing normally for everyone else. The U.S. Navy denies the experiment occurred. No official documentation exists. Many researchers believe the story is fabrication. However, multiple witnesses independently described similar events, and some temporal effects align with theoretical physics predictions about extreme electromagnetic fields affecting space-time. If any version occurred as described, it demonstrated time moving at radically different rates for different reference frames, minutes becoming hours or hours becoming decades. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing based on electromagnetic conditions. Coral Castle Time Anomalies. Between 1923 and 1951, Edward Leeds Calnan single-handedly built Coral Castle in Florida, a structure containing over 1,100 tons of precisely carved coral rock moved using unknown methods. Leeds Calnan was barely over 5 feet tall, weighed 100 pounds, yet moved multi-ton blocks with no visible equipment. He claimed to understand pyramid secrets and to have discovered how to reverse time in matter. Leeds Calnan worked exclusively at night, allowing no witnesses. He claimed to know how to make matter go back, and suggested he could reverse time locally to make heavy stones weightless. Several visitors reported experiencing time distortions near Coral Castle. Watches would run backwards or stop entirely. Time seemed to pass differently inside versus outside. Visitors reported being inside for what felt like minutes, but discovering hours had passed. One 1949 documented account describes a couple visiting Coral Castle. The woman's watch stopped when she entered, then ran backwards at exactly twice normal speed when they left. After leaving the property, the watch resumed normal function. Leeds-Kalnin's writings hint at temporal manipulation. He wrote about magnetic current and its relationship to time, suggesting that controlling magnetic flows could alter time's passage. After his death in 1951, researchers using sensitive instruments reported unusual magnetic field patterns and electromagnetic anomalies. Time measurements using atomic clocks showed slight but measurable discrepancies between time inside and outside certain parts of the structure. The mainstream explanation is that Leeds-Kalnin used conventional methods and worked at night to hide his techniques. The time anomalies are attributed to magnetic interference affecting watches. But Leeds-Kalnin's claims about reversing time and matter, combined with visitor reports of temporal effects, suggest he might have discovered relationships between electromagnetic fields and time flow. If electromagnetic configurations can affect time's passage, then Leeds-Kalnin may have created conditions where time moved differently within his structure, possibly explaining how he moved massive stones that should have been impossible for one man. 10 moments where time provably moved backwards. Atomic clocks aging at different rates, some experiencing more time, others less, proving time flexibility. Human bodies responding to stimuli before those stimuli exist with overwhelming statistical evidence. A global network of quantum random number generators responding to disasters hours before they occur. Manufactured objects embedded in stone millions of years old, existing before their creation. The delayed choice quantum eraser proving future measurements change past events. Specialized mirrors allegedly concentrating time flow, allowing perception of distant and future events. Remote viewers describing future facilities before they're built, documented in its declassified programs. Animals evacuating days before earthquakes when no precursor signals exist. Navy experiments allegedly creating temporal displacement. A stone structure where time reportedly passes at different rates. The evidence varies in strength. The Hafele-Keating Experiment and delayed choice quantum eraser are established physics. Presentiment Experiments and the Global Consciousness Project have extensive peer-reviewed research. Out-of-place artifacts exist, but interpretations are disputed. Kozyrev's mirrors, remote viewing, animal predictions, the Philadelphia experiment, and Coral Castle range from controversial to fringe. But collectively, they point toward one conclusion. Time doesn't always move forward uniformly. Under certain conditions, high speeds, intense gravity, quantum systems, possibly consciousness, possibly electromagnetic fields, time behaves strangely. The quantum experiments are undeniable. Future measurements affect past events. This is repeatable laboratory physics. Presentiment studies show effects before causes with billions to one odds. The Global Consciousness Project shows quantum systems responding to futures with overwhelming statistical significance. The historical cases are murkier. Did objects time travel into ancient rock? Did mirrors concentrate time? Did the Philadelphia experiment happen? We can't be certain, but accounts exist, witnesses testified, and claims align with theoretical predictions. What's clear is that time's arrow isn't absolute. It bends, flexes, reverses. The past isn't fixed. The future isn't completely undetermined. The boundary between them is permeable, with information flowing both directions. We live in a universe where time demonstrably moves backwards. Not always, not everywhere, but sometimes under conditions we're beginning to understand. The arrow of time points forward most of the time, but under the right circumstances, it reverses. Time doesn't just move forward. Sometimes, provably, it moves backwards.